Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 121 of Storyteller Conclave. This is a show all about helping you run the best tabletop role-playing game that you can. Whether you're a new storyteller or dungeon master learning the craft, or an experienced storyteller looking to take your game to the next level. I'm Sarah.
I'm lost in thought.
Yeah?
Yeah, I almost missed the button. Sarah literally had to look at me and be like, you want to cue us in? I'm like, yes, that is a thing.
Yes, I do. What are we? What's on your mind? Do you want to share with the party, or?
More or less, all I want to say is depression is a hell of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
It affects a lot of people, and because I have a microphone and you don't, well, you do, but I'm gonna say congratulations to you who got out of bed. Congratulations to you who went to work today and did your hours. Congratulations to the people who support you and the people who help you, the people who call, the people who write, the people who nag, the people who love you that you may not reach back out to. Congratulations to all of you. To you who listen, to you who care, to you who notice. So.
Yeah. It's I've been pretty open about my own depression for a while, and trust me, like it took some recontextualizing of my own struggles sometimes. Where really honestly, if you're struggling with depression, like honestly, and I mean from the bottom of my heart, no scrap of sarcasm whatsoever in my voice. Congratulations if you got out of bed today and took a shower and like got through the day, because when you're deep in depression, like that's a thing. That's a thing, you know.
And if you're hearing this and you're feeling that level, you are loved. There are people who care. There are people who help you if whether you want it or not at times. But we're all, it's a community of people that you probably don't even realize they're there around you.
Depression is a very insidious thing because the first thing it does is it tells you that nobody else cares.
Yeah.
And that nothing is worth it.
Yeah.
So it's...
I had another friend literally tell me today, like, just let me melt away.
Yeah.
And I think it's almost more destructive than watching someone die by a physical disease or the silence of ghosting.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because you hurt that you can't help more.
Yeah. Because in a certain way they want it, you know.
I think that's the worst.
Or I should say, let me rephrase, because that sounded really crappy of me. The depression tells you that's what you want.
Correct. No, I'm with you.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I've definitely been there. So.
And that's my 3 minutes of darkness for this conversation.
No,
and
but
support.
But
it's really out of
though,
support.
Like,
I give it out of support.
You know, we've talked about it before on the show, and we've talked about a couple of our listeners have talked to us about their own struggles and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And, want you to know that every single one of you, we say at the end of the show, we love you, and this is.
It's not a sales pitch.
We're pulling for the best for you.
Yeah, and to those who think that your words are falling on deaf ears when you talk to someone who's having challenges, take a breath. Listen, be congratulated, try again tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
Never stop trying. So, all right. So we're doing a show on world building of all things.
Well, a little bit on world building and a little bit on player backgrounds and kind of where those two things start intersecting.
Well, this kind of came from a mind frame, and I'm gonna try and get my head back in the game here a little bit. Funny. It came from the mind frame that there are games like City of Mist that help you build a world to start with.
Yeah.
Like literally sit you down with your players and say, session 0 is you building the world together. Not only your characters, but like what the city looks like, what the factions are, who's there. And it makes you wonder like why we don't just do that in other games.
Mm-hmm.
Now, a lot of times we have pre-built universes. Like, and I say universes. I don't necessarily mean like settings, but I mean full-on universes. Like, Forgotten Realms is a universe. Let's be honest.
Yeah, sure.
7th Sea is its own universe. There's all kind. It's beyond the physical terrain. You've got things. BattleTech, clearly universe. You know, Warhammer universe. So those types of things, it's very hard to see world building because you're not building. It's already there. There's something established, but it doesn't preclude you from defining your setting and your world within it. What is the plot wrapped around your world? And so I was like, okay, when we talk about doing this, what is the harm to the plot, number one, and number two, where do we start for systems that don't encourage that don't have that, that give you either a setting, or when you've got your own setting, like how do you, like I've got a world and I've got a setting and this is the way things work. How do you give up a little bit to fill in the blanks? Yeah, where do you find those blanks? And so that's kind of where this came from. This discussion started with, and I think it was 3 days ago. Sarah goes, "Where the hell is this going? Like, how are we doing this?"
well, no, it was
a very broad idea.
It was less where the hell is this going, and it was just more like, okay, you were the one that wrote this one down on the ideas for future shows sheet.
I did.
So you had an idea for where you wanted to go with this. Now, I have some thoughts.
Yeah.
I have some input. But as this show was kind of your baby, I didn't want it to be like, all right, so here's what we're doing, you know?
So let's start with, like, established canon, and we're kind of talking about stuff like that. So when you're dealing with established canon, even the most detailed established canon that are out there, there are some games that go hard into these are the characters you're physically playing. Mostly when I find that you get physical characters that you're playing and you're given backgrounds and things like that, they still leave holes, but they explicitly tell you what those holes are.
Right.
Like they're telling you what your background and stuff is, but it doesn't tell you what the drive of the character is. Like why they're doing what they're doing, and that's really for you to fill in. In some ways that makes it easier, but we're going to step like one distance away from those types of settings and move into the ones where there's established quote-unquote worlds.
It's like we mentioned Forgotten Realms, 7th Sea, all the...
And I agree that, most times than not, your first impulse is don't change anything. Use established... Like, when I use 7th Sea... You're seeing me wanting to just dump this right off the table?
Yes. Rob put his drink literally on the edge of the table.
I so did.
And I was like, nah, it's not going to...
That's not going to... Nope. But yeah, I think there's a sense that if you only know the world well enough, and maybe some of your players know it better, you're running the risk that if you make a change to it, you're going to hurt the world. You're going to hurt the setting and the image of it in front of the players. And it can be that kind of thing, but at the same time, since they already are aware of it, it kind of can give them a little more inspiration on what they could do and how they could fit into it.
I think that this is like one of the reasons you've said that, because I've lamented some time before, like, I would love to play in an Elder Scrolls game.
Yeah.
Like, it'd be great if someone else would run one, subtle hint.
Yep, I know.
And you just looked me flat in the eye and you were like, I would never do that. That's because you know this setting way too well, and I would never be able to do it justice for you. I was like, I don't know about that, but okay, I get where you're going.
Yeah, because like you have an expectation in your mind of what you're going to see and how it's going to feel, and the sensations that you're going to go through walking through that world. And if it's a cardboard version of it, and one thing of it is glaringly off, suddenly you're getting stabbed in your creative. Your realism starts to break down.
Yeah, I can see it. I think there's... I mean, I would argue that with Elder Scrolls, the lore is already so screwed up, and the presentation of it already is such cardboard cutouts because Bethesda...
all the different versions of it?
Yeah. Just overreaches and underperforms in a lot of ways.
Well, and I think the same could be said for like Forgotten Realms. I think we set into our minds an expectation as a storyteller of how established a setting is.
Yeah.
Like, there's a thought that, Ravenloft is an established setting, and breaking away from the established setting of Ravenloft would be bad because your players would know the difference, even if they've stepped one toe in it.
Right.
There's a feeling. But the truth is that there's a lot of things you could do in it easily.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And that's the whole point of it is that, and I think it was really great. And I'll reference it a couple times. Mont Cook of Mont Cook Games.
Monty Cook.
Yes.
Yes.
Is one to say that, much like others do, once the moment, the second that you stepped your players into that world, it's yours. You can do whatever you want.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter.
I was recently listening to a different podcast about Savage Worlds, and they had a whole discussion about playing in established canon worlds. And they were referring to things like Star Wars.
Yeah.
And stuff like that, and they were... the discussion was largely that, like, a lot of them at that table didn't feel comfortable playing there because they didn't feel like there was a lot of room left for, holes to fill with your own plot and such like that. And I think that's a real challenge for some people. Like, I don't tend to like doing that, but I think there are some IPs that work a lot better than others. Like Star Wars, I think, is pretty easy to fit your own story in.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of time that takes place over. There's a lot of, like, the stories are, the main events of them, the movies and such that they unfold in some very specific locations, but it's a big galaxy.
Yeah, I mean, a good person told me once that, like, especially with Star Wars, the idea of having a Wookiee somewhere else. And they're like, well, they've established that the Wookiees have been pretty much annihilated. Did you say pretty much? Because that means there's other Wookiees.
Right.
Duh. Like, we know they're not annihilated.
Yeah.
We've seen that, like, clearly. And another story written by someone else shows that they weren't annihilated, that they were enslaved, in fact.
Yeah.
So it's easy to step away and allow those stories to become. And I think that's the trick, is that when you have an established world, the hardest thing that you can do, but the most benefit you can get from it, is talk about that world to your players and let it inspire ideas within them. And then cultivate that inspiration. If they're asking about something specific in that world, answer as many questions as possible. Because they're already thinking down a line. Let them keep going.
Yeah.
Don't give them an idea. Just answer the questions.
Yes.
If you start talking about, a good example would be, especially with Elder Scrolls, we talk about elementals, and you're like, no, they're not
Atronachs.
They're Atronachs.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's really an Atronach?
It's just an elemental.
Right.
But it's what we call them here.
Right.
In Tamriel.
But why are they Atronachs? Like, what makes them different? Do they have souls?
No, they're Daedra.
Okay, so what's a Daedra?
It's an extraplanar being from Oblivion.
Oh, what the heck's Oblivion?
Oblivion is any place that isn't here.
And that's where that line starts going down, until you eventually discover that there's an actual realm in Oblivion, quote unquote, where it's knowledge, just endless knowledge. Books, scrolls, stories, everything. Literally everything.
And crawling with Lovecraftian horrors.
But that can bring about a whole story for someone.
Sure, absolutely.
And that's the thing, is that anytime you've got existing canon, answer questions. Again, do your best and damnedest not to give them ideas, but just answer those questions and then ask them where they're going with it. Because you never know, but that helps breed that inspiration. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think, like I said, the impulse is, like, not, at least for me, it was not to mess with the canon, but honestly, like, tying your stuff into the canon is probably the best move you can do.
Without a doubt.
I mean, you absolutely should futz with the canon and duct tape yourself to the side of it. There are... like in Sean's games, he was running in Waterdeep. One of the things he kept trying to push us to do is tie ourselves into the existing factions, the Harpers, the Order of the Gauntlet, the whatevers.
Yeah.
But there's like a dozen different factions in Waterdeep, and he was like, yeah, you guys should all get involved in them. And the more tied in you are to things like that, though, like even just saying, okay, my character's a member of the Harpers. Okay, if you know Forgotten Realms, if you know Waterdeep, you as the storyteller then go, oh crap, that gives me so many plot hooks for you. That gives me like 3 NPCs off the top of my head that you can be involved with. That gives you 7 different plots you can be involved with, and that gives you some great motivation to do A, B, C, or D.
Right.
And right there, like, I mean, that's a gold mine for storytellers.
Yeah.
Now I never need to wonder what to do with your character.
Right. I can literally just have, at any given time, I can have a dead Harper on the ground, and now it's, oh shoot, this is one of mine.
I have to avenge him.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. And that's the thing. So when we start stepping even into, regardless of the world that you're in, like player backgrounds and their connections to them give you that linkage. And it starts the investment process. And I think that's really what a lot of this, if I could put anything forward and come back to it multiple times within our show, is that by doing any part of this, you are breeding player investment.
Mm-hmm.
And investment is one of the hardest things to get into a game. It is exceptionally hard because when your players are invested, they will do the things you ask them to do. When your players are not invested, they will do whatever they want to do.
Mm-hmm.
That's the difference.
Yeah.
If you want your players to not feel like they're being shoved through a game on rails, get them invested.
Mm-hmm.
At that point, they will run down the tracks as hard as and as fast as they can.
Yep.
Every time. So when a player presents to you a background that's already attached to the world, be it your own world, meaning you give them, there's a word that I'm looking for, but I'm lost it. Agency. When you give them agency to write into your world,
mm-hmm.
you are already giving them investment.
Yeah.
No matter how broad the stroke is. Because at that point, you can start narrowing down what part of that is important to you.
Mm-hmm.
And giving them the utility to express themselves through those backgrounds, again, even in some broad strokes, those broad strokes may not even reach your plot.
Mm-hmm.
But an aspect of that broad stroke can be used as a hook. I.e., I'm ex-prince from a land that was destroyed. It was
mm-hmm.
it was an island, and I was exiled by my father, and then the kingdom fell.
Mm-hmm.
So technically, I have nobility, and that's how I have my money. And I've just been living like an exiled individual, and have lost my name because of that. But unfortunately, it means that there are people who want me because our kingdom fell, but I'm still the heir.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're hunted. Okay, so they're thinking in their mind, they have a hunted background, they have money, and they've kind of explained things. What that tells me as a storyteller is that there are people that matter to them.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe their sister that they didn't know they had. Maybe a chancellor from their land who also got away. We don't have to go to their island. But if that chancellor shows up doing something within my story and they recognize them, that person is now protected in their mind.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, the moment that one of my villainous groups has the markings of the people hunting them, suddenly now it matters.
Right.
Either to run from them or to get close to them for information. And I didn't have to do anything. All I had to do was grab small aspects
mm-hmm.
that
mm-hmm.
they already had given me.
As one of the things I was thinking too about is the difference in what sort of world building you get out of storytellers versus what you get out of players. And that is, storytellers will often world build with utility in mind.
Yes.
We think about, okay, what is the realm called? What is its politics mm-hmm. and governmental structure like? How populous is it? What's
sure.
their major imports and exports? What's a major religion they've got there, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
Players world build with drama in mind.
Yes.
Players will not think of any of those details, but what they will think is, so my character was a prince, and there was a count who coveted the throne,
mm-hmm.
and that's why X, Y, and Z happened, and the throne was usurped, and that's why I'm on the run,
mm-hmm.
and the count's men are after me, etc., etc. Like, they will create kingdoms whole cloth, but only to serve as a backdrop for this wicked count that overthrew
right.
them.
Correct.
I mean, you as a storyteller may look at that and go, okay, well, how am I going to make this, like, count and prince and this, and what's the governmental structure there? Why would the count stand to actually pick up the crown? You know what? Maybe it matters, maybe it doesn't.
It doesn't until it's encountered, and that's the key.
Exactly. But what I'm saying though is that you may not even have come up with a story like that simply because you're not mm-hmm. looking for drama when you're world building. Your players are the ones that hand that to you, and that is honestly an invaluable resource.
That being said, at that level, Knox just posted something, and I love this.
First off, Knox is killing me in chat here. This hypothetical PC that we're talking about. Yeah. Is this the character formerly known as Prince?
yeah. But just put in, I just want a place in town where I can get Japanese-style crepes with ice cream. Right?
Uh-huh.
That's fine. That's actually a solid build.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe their character isn't a hero yet.
Mm-hmm.
They're just becoming one. Like, this is the world where they become a hero. But they know people in town.
Mm-hmm.
You do know the ice cream parlor, or at least what is currently known as the ice cream parlor, and it happens to be run by an elderly man from an Asian province.
Yeah.
And he was taught French crepes and kind of mixes it all together.
Mm-hmm.
And the fusion is enough that it brings people in. I mean, he doesn't make a lot there, but he makes enough that he's got some pretty decent patrons who order out from his place and have him delivered. And it just so happens you've made a few deliveries in town. So you know this guy and this guy and this guy.
Yeah.
And they know they can go to you to get some crepes in the middle of the night when the Duchess really wants some crepes.
The funny thing is, you think that's such an innocuous little request, and it can be a great tie-in, especially for a zero to hero, story to be right there.
Exactly.
You're going to be that character that, like, 17 sessions in is going to be like, firing an assault rifle over the broken out wall of a shattered building.
Mm-hmm.
At the robot, minions of the big bad evil guy who have destroyed half the city, and you're gonna be shouting, "I just wanted some damn crepes!"
I just wanted a cup of coffee.
Yeah.
I just wanted a cup of coffee.
Uh-huh.
That's it. I mean, greater movies have been made about characters who have epic backgrounds, but literally, they just got out of prison, and all they wanted was a cup of coffee.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. That's it. It's that simple.
I mean, it's in a way, it's kind of what John Wick was.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I was happily retired. I was just mourning my wife, caring for my dog.
Yeah.
Like, honestly, I'd have let the whole car thing go, but you shot my dog. And that was the last memory I had of my wife. And that, I can't let that go. And you think of how John Wick's story would have been different if they just hadn't shot the dog.
Well, and here's my favorite part about that, as regards to what we're doing. For world building, so you've got this idea that you want to run a game that involves some underworld stuff, a lot of gunplay, a little bit of comedy, but like this whole assassins world.
Mm-hmm.
And one of your players comes up to you and goes, "Hey, okay, so I'm playing kind of like this retired assassin." You're like, "Great, okay, wonderful." But he's like a ghost. Like, he did all of the bad jobs so that he could retire.
Mm-hmm.
Go on.
Okay.
So, like, they sent him on the most deadly job ever, and he survived it. Okay. You know why? Because he got out for love, and then his wife died on him. Oh, wow, that's tragic. So, that's where I'm starting the game. I'm retired. Okay, you're a retired old assassin.
Uh-huh.
There's a name for you.
Yeah.
Okay. And literally, I could easily see a player writing up the entire, like, that type of history for it and allowing for you to fill in all those gaps. Like, who was the last guy you did the job for? Oh, it was this guy.
Mm-hmm.
And he asked me to kill off this whole ring-leading group. Okay, you got it.
Now, that brings up my next point, too,
right.
Though, is that... So as we're talking about getting your backstories from your players, I mean, not every backstory that you're going to receive from your players is going to be solid gold.
Right.
Like, I mean, Rob and I are very experienced at coming up with this. We can come up with a million stories off the top of our heads, but some players...
I'm terrible at writing my own character stories in other people's games.
But still, though, I mean, we're used at least to leaning into the drama and coming up with stories like this.
Correct.
But some players... It might not be good at it, or they may not be experienced at it, or a combination of both.
Right.
And it may be more difficult for them to do, and especially if they're not familiar with the setting going in, it may be a lot more difficult for them to just be like, oh, just integrate it into the canon of Forgotten Realms. Well, gee, I'll just catch up on the, 30, 40 years of that.
Yeah, exactly. Like, physical years of that.
Right.
Countless books, tons of add-ons, 3 different versions of D&D.
Yes, exactly. So... I mean, it can be big, and so not everything you're going to receive is going to be, Pulitzer Prize, style stuff. What I like to do is I like to write very vague.
Mm-hmm.
I like to write stuff that can be transplanted just about anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, my wizard in your game,
Yep.
I was like, lived in a mining village in the mountains.
Mm-hmm. Perfect.
Period. I don't care what mountains. I don't care what we mined.
Nope.
I don't care what was going on there,
Mm-hmm.
what the other communities were like. We lived in a mining village up in the mountains where it was snowy.
Yep.
That's the only thing that was necessary to the setting.
Yep.
And you could have been like, oh, yeah, okay, so on my map up in the north, there's all these mountains by the Orc kingdoms. Cool. Sounds great.
Mm-hmm.
I'll write Orcish down as my secondary language.
Yep.
And that was done,
Yep.
you know?
Yep.
I had one of my players in my Elder Scrolls game, the Mad Elf, actually, gave me a very good backstory involving the tragic death of his mother, who was raising him in a remote village, and the whole place was razed to the ground by some bandits.
Mm-hmm.
And I already had this plot in mind of this bandit uprising in this remote part of Cyrodiil, and I said, okay, well, what if he says, well, I didn't know the bandit's name. Okay, what if you did? Would that change anything about your story? No, I think, if you give me a name, that's cool. I said, cool. His name is Mogrub Uzguk. You know that name. Mm-hmm. He's like, okay, how do you spell that? Mm-hmm. Writes it down. I hate this guy. Gotcha. Mm-hmm. And sure enough, we get up into 10 game sessions later, we get up into the bandit kingdoms, and like, oh yeah, we're these rough and tumble bandits, and we follow a guy named Mogrub, and he's like, go on.
Investment.
Exactly. Instant investment. Just because I took part of his story and I met him halfway.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just about him reaching out with, hey, there's bandits involved, and me going, okay, so what if the bandits were like this? Is that cool? Can we integrate there?
Yeah. Now, there's a framing point of saying no. Where your players may go too far or too detailed.
Yeah, sometimes your players hand you things that just don't work.
Yeah. And you should be able to say no. Now, I honestly tell you, I can't say when you should say no. It all depends on the game. I think you will learn when to say no within certain story parameters, but sometimes it doesn't matter what they're adding. You can just ignore whole cloth of it because it doesn't affect the plot. But at the same time, if they go into detail about the world, about, races or prejudice or something on a broad cloth scale that might affect other players, I think that's where things start becoming closer to the no, that's too much. For instance, if a player is talking about the local setting, and I'll use something like Shadowrun as an example, and they start talking about how they're involved with a very large megacorp, that their family was involved in heavily building, military tech for, and they make up a brand new megacorp that's larger than other megacorps.
Right.
And
they bought As Technology last year. Oh, did they?
Okay, so you're literally not only changing the canon of the existing world, but you're also setting up an entire corporate structure behind you. Mm-hmm. Okay, go on. Did they topple? So at this point, it becomes more and more difficult for you to think about all the integration points and how that affects other players.
Yeah. For me, who plays a lot of fantasy storytelling, a lot of times it'll be okay, well, my character's a draconian because draconian, or dragonborn, or in the book, you're like, okay, but they don't exist in Tamriel, and that's where my game is set.
Right.
Well, my character is. No, your character flat up isn't. No is the answer. You know.
Right.
Or what I've seen too before is okay, well, they come from this kingdom like this, and you're like, that kingdom doesn't exist in my canon. Can we make you fit somewhere else? Well, no, it's really important that this. Okay, then you can't do that.
Yeah, my group are blind magic monks. Okay.
Well, okay, I mean, I can understand that.
Right.
But inventing a whole kingdom, whole cloth.
Right.
Is one thing. Now, you're it was a little insignificant island kingdom of, 100,000 people that, disappeared in a blip in the political machinations of the major empire that was nearby.
Right.
And there was some political drama where a count was trying to overthrow the thing, and I'm a deposed prince and stuff like that. But, literally, even if my kingdom were still there, and I came to the mainland and were like, I'm the Prince of Boletaria, they'd been like, you who now?
Yeah.
That I don't mind that style world building, where you're going to be like, oh yeah, it's an insignificant little thing off in the corner. it still justifies my background. I'm still nobility, etc., etc.
Sure.
But, like, I'm not shifting the geopolitical infrastructure of your world by adding this little island kingdom.
Right, exactly, exactly. And that's the whole thing, is how much does it affect the other players? How much does it affect the story, the impact of the story that having on those players? And how much resources are they pulling from their background versus what their character is capable of?
Yeah.
I think that's the other piece to it. So finessing the character a little bit to push them into something that's more legitimate. If their character has the stats and points for it, sure, let's figure out a way that we can make that work. But if they're like literally just a standard elf, but if they want to be an aquatic elf from an area that doesn't exist and you're having everything in a desert campaign, that's just them being challenging.
Yeah,
that's just them being challenging.
Nox is asking in the live chat, what's the term for the character that doesn't fit in? The 13th Samurai. It's the 13th Warrior.
Yes.
As in the movie, the 13th Warrior. It was a movie about a bunch of Vikings, and Antonio Banderas' character was playing an Arabian poet.
You could
didn't speak the language.
The Hobbit also fits. It also fits. So, great for novels. Terrible for RPGs.
Yeah.
So, when they are defining themselves, even in existing canon, anytime we can tie them to something, you're giving a benefit to yourself as a storyteller. Yeah. Anytime you want to make minor changes to these groups, that's fine. For instance, if your player is talking about, for instance, I would say in Elder Scrolls, because I do know there's an assassins group in the Elder Scrolls, right? That have hired hits. Like, maybe I want to be John Wick in your world, in Elder Scrolls.
Sure.
Which, very easy to do. 100% honest, easy to do. But I say that the person who ordered the hit didn't order it on, the final hit. It was a hit on somebody within that assassin's order. So it was a writ on somebody else in there so they could elevate themselves in that order. And I name people. Now, in all honesty, in Elder Scrolls, it probably wouldn't make that much of a difference.
Yeah.
But you could very easily say, do you mind if we change the names to these two people? And just finesse it in that direction. Again, it doesn't matter because it's done. That's part of the plot history. But at the same time, when it comes back around, the player's the one that matters within those worlds. And again, gets that investment.
Yeah.
But it also lets them invest in the lore, like we were saying earlier, which I think is great. I think where you really need to start focusing yourself as a storyteller when you do these things is a lot of players will create very broad strokes, like we were talking about, kingdoms, histories, things that happened,
Well, like
maybe
I said, they'll build for drama. They're not going to think of, like I said, the geopolitical implications of sticking a kingdom there.
Right.
They're just going to think, oh, what if an evil count overthrew my throne?
Exactly. The thought is that you then need to, as a storyteller, bring that scope down to your reality. Your 2 blocks of a city, or your section of the countryside. Whatever your act or story or campaign is framed to. And don't go beyond what the players can see from the moment they step into the scene. If they can't see beyond the mountains, forget about the beyond the mountains.
Yeah.
Whatever's there is there. It doesn't matter. But within that mountain range, that's the kind of questions of scope you need to be playing with your characters. Let them help you fill those places in. And the closer you get to them, the more defined those areas can be, and can be helpfully defined by your players. You don't have to come up with every name of every innkeep and bread maker and tankard swinger and guild leader. Right? Your players can help you define those relationships so that your story can be attached around it. And that's the really key thing there, is that when you're getting components of scale, remember it is about where they're at. And this is where things can get, where you can start asking those questions.
Yeah.
Because we talked about the large scope stuff, like the government, the rules, laws, and things like that. Frame questions to your players while they're coming up with their things. When they come up with you came to this kingdom, from your island or whatever. Who met with you? Who helped you get settled?
Mm-hmm.
You know, was there a count or a duke who knew you? Yeah. Okay, it was this group. That's they're a local duchy. Okay, let's come up with a name for them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and then integrate that into your government presence that's there. Mm-hmm. Now you have a name for someone who's local. They came up with it. Great. Or they came up with the idea of what it is, and they're excited about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it's tying them to them. You know, are there laws that have been broken? If you've got players who literally talk about either being criminals or fighting criminals or dealing with criminal underworld, ask them about some of the laws. Mm-hmm. Are there any quirky laws? Like something that you just don't like or something that you know very well.
Yeah.
Let them help define that, because that then sets a tone in their mind of what they're seeing day to day.
And you know, I think that the most important thing too is that this not only shows you what your players hold important.
Exactly.
Okay, and that's number one. Is that your players' backstories and what your players bring to the table for world building is going to show you what they find to be important. That will inform what sort of story they're asking you to tell them.
Exactly.
But the other thing that keeps coming to mind too, as we're kind of talking about, like you're saying, like, you know, if you're never going to go over the mountains, don't write what's on the other side of the mountains.
Yep.
You know, it's I've been watching some stuff on YouTube about one of my favorite games, Dark Souls.
Yeah.
And there's a channel that like goes into basically developer debug mode in that game and will like swing the camera around in weird places that you can never normally see in the game to show you kind of what's behind places.
Right.
They flip the lighting up all the way so you can see through the darkness and whatnot.
Yeah.
And it's remarkable how little stuff is actually like, and it's a beautiful game.
Yeah.
But like, man, if you're 1 inch beyond the sight line of where they need, like, they just did not put anything there.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that same philosophy really kind of comes down to world building and especially, like, you know, with getting that feedback from your players of, like, what do they want to put into the world and stuff like that. So what this does is it helps you essentially set up, just like in video game design, your facades.
Yes.
You know?
Yep.
What do you need to be a fully fleshed out interactable object, and what literally can be a cardboard cutout you set in the distance to fool them into thinking that it's there.
Yep.
You know?
Yep.
But in the story sense.
Knox used the Truman Show.
Yeah, the Truman Show. Yeah, exactly.
That's a great way. I mean, there was stuff, a great framing within the Truman Show for the Truman's World, where things in the world weren't even finished or real.
Mm-hmm.
You know, this was a giant office building, but the elevators didn't work.
Yeah.
They weren't even real because they didn't have to be.
Yeah.
That was an expense they did not want to pay.
Because Truman wasn't ever going to go into them, and if they're not going to interact with it, why come up with mechanics for it?
Correct. Until you have to.
Uh-huh.
Because I'm willing to bet that elevator had out of order the day that he needed to use it.
Oh, I'm sure.
And then they looked to the stairs, and there was guys cleaning it. But magically, the guy that they needed to talk to came right out the door next to it like, "Oh, Truman, it's good to see you.
Uh-huh.
You know, why don't we meet outside? It's much more comfortable, and it's a beautiful day."
Bingo. And there is... you never needed to put anything more than a lobby in that building.
That's right.
And honestly, that's great game design.
Yeah.
That's great game design.
I mean,
right there.
how many times have you been in a game, and you've gone up a set of stairs into a doorway, and there's rubble in front of it?
Uh-huh.
Or rubble forms in front of it.
Uh-huh.
You know, oh, can't go that way. Start running down the corridor. Oh, I can't go this way. I guess I have to go into the sewers.
Right.
A framed-in, walled-in area to get turned around in.
And then that's not to say that you should railroad your characters. But...
No, but it is a way of understanding framing and scope.
Yes, exactly.
So,
And if someone says, "Hey, you know, my character, you know, works intimately with this particular aspect of the story, or knows a bunch of people here, or is looking to get into this, or comes from this," you understand that is something maybe you should put some extra time fleshing out into.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the kind of thing that we're talking about. You know, let your characters become invested in the world. Let them come up with intricacies that they know, because the moment that those things start to break down is the moment they get more invested.
Yeah.
That they want to fix this problem.
Mm-hmm.
You know, or break it more depending on what investment they're going after.
Yeah.
You know, what drives them. I love that watching that turn. You know, where somebody gets invested in something, and then you just start using that investment to pull everything else together.
Now, kind of a little off tangent from the world building aspect,
Mm-hmm.
but directly related to your players' investment and building the world that they want to see. One question I'm going to be adding into our post-game breakdown
Mm-hmm.
is what would you like to see happen next game?
Okay.
Because and that's not to say that, you know, you get to ask me to make something happen. Like, I'm not going to shift the plot just because you said you wanted to see it happen. That's not what the purpose of the question is. But it gives you an insight into the characters and where they foresee the plot going,
Mm-hmm.
and what intent they may have with their character moving forward.
Okay. I may help you with one aspect of that.
What's that?
And that's a very broad question. And that may confuse some of your players as like, well, how do I answer that? You may want to help give them prompts.
Yeah, maybe.
I'm just thinking it's very broad.
But I kind of like it open-ended. Because it leaves a lot of room for interpretation on the player, and that leaves them to answer what they feel is important.
Right, but what I'm going to say is that you might all too often, because they don't have a direction, they're going to say, I don't know. Everything's fine. I don't know. I just want to see where things are going. Because they don't have a good answer to an open-ended question.
Yeah, maybe. I think that's a cop-out, but okay.
We'll talk more.
Okay.
I've got some ideas there for you.
Okay.
So, all right. So, because I want to get to these questions, because I think the questions help answer some of the other stuff I want to talk about. All I'm going to say is engaging your players in world building allows them to feel ownership even before the dice hit the table.
Mm-hmm.
That it gives you hooks when their friends, their family, their neighbors are involved in actions of plot.
Yeah.
And that's awesome.
Yeah.
As a player, though, be involved in the story. Ask questions about the world and be interested in it for you and your character. Because when you ask about the world, the storyteller is going to see that interest and see that investment.
Yeah.
And they will get excited, which will make you excited and others excited.
Mm-hmm.
That's all I'm saying.
Absolutely.
All right, let's hit some of these questions.
Alrighty. Let's start at the bottom here.
Sounds good.
So Overwatch asks, having some star creators at your table that add really good ideas to your world is one thing, but how do you deal with the situations when the ideas are not so good? What do you do about a player that keeps suggesting something that makes no sense, is contrary to what's been done so far, or is just plain bad, especially if they have their hearts set on it?
My concern with that is that I've dealt with players who've graced the edge of it.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea that a player is doing something bad is always a hard statement to run.
Yeah.
Because bad is subjective at best.
Mm-hmm.
I think that if it is something that is destructive to the game, or shows that it is beyond what the character is, and what the merits of the character is, meaning they're writing background to add on to the character's existing abilities.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think at that point you need to help scope them to their character. Like,
yeah,
if you want a character who's noble and has something, there's rules for that. Like, we can give you edges and flaws and make your character noble and give them some of these abilities. No. I'm a gunslinger, but I'm a noble gunslinger. Like, I got money, old money.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I can call my dad for stuff. Well, there's rules for that.
Right. As long if you can make that fit in the points, that's fine. You know?
Or I don't have to eat or sleep ever. I'm not undead. I actually am a recovered vampire. So I just don't have a soul.
Mm-hmm.
So if I ever die, I don't get to come back. Like, I get resurrected, but I also can't die by starvation or bleeding out.
Mm-hmm.
That's not going to happen. Okay, well that's those are powers that aren't in the game. Well, yeah, but I've got this thing that means I can't survive. No, you're literally changing the rules of the game.
Yeah.
So I think once you start stepping beyond the rule base, I think that's when you really have to check with the player and get them back into scope.
I think my answer for this is twofold. First, I think when you've got a player that really wants to insists on straying out of the boundaries and foraying off into their own little world here and trying to introduce things that are actively like harmful to the setting and the established canon and stuff like that. I think the most important question you can ask them is, what are you trying to accomplish with, like, what story are you trying to tell? You know, what does your suggestion add to the setting that you feel it's lacking that you need to add this in?
Right.
And if their answer is, just for S's and G's, I just think it's funny, then you can be like, okay, I'm not finding it particularly enjoyable, and I'm not going to include it in my game. You know, maybe we can come to a compromise if there's something there. But if it's not, like, if it's literally not important to you, then I'm not going to include it.
Right.
Because it changes things for the worse. You know.
Yep.
No, but I think if you've got a player that is like, again, trying to like and keeps pushing, you know, beyond having that conversation of them just trying to add like weird. I always think of the goofy character that's like, my character is a clown and he hits people with pies for 1d4 damage, and you're like, this is a serious like Game of Thrones style game, you know? Like, why are we doing a clown that hits people with pies, you know? And tells, you've got a D10 list or a D100 list of corny jokes to tell every time you have a line to say.
Right.
If you've got a player that persists in that, one of the best pieces of advice I've heard in a long time is, don't use an in-game solution to solve an out-of-game problem. I oftentimes see, like, on Reddit discussions and stuff like that, well, how do I punish this player in character? You know, how do I punish his character? Well, don't. It's the player being disruptive. It's the player trying to screw with your plot, trying to screw with your world and stuff like that. And they're not respecting the tone of the game. They're not respecting the other people, and they're not respecting your story and your world building.
Yep, exactly.
And that needs to be an out-of-character discussion.
Yep.
So, you know, I think there's 2 degrees to that. I mean, I wouldn't immediately jump to the out of, like, you did a world building bad. You know, I wouldn't immediately jump to the sit down talk.
Sure.
But, you know, the come to Gygax speech.
Yeah. Or the, like, it's just I don't think that's fitting the tone of this game.
Yeah.
And I think when you're doing more open world building with more players, that kind of is going to be shown. Pardon me. I think the other players will be able to step up and say, yeah, that doesn't sound right. And that's how you'll know. Yeah. Yeah. And that's why I think open table world building is fun, and it allows you to feel the tempo of the entire group.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
So, all right. Technolich, they said, how do you motivate a player who is not interested in world building process? Should it be a requirement that players be an active participant in collaborative world building, or is it okay just to let someone hang if that's what they're there to do?
No, I mean, I don't think anybody's obligated to. I mean, so like, some people are just people. You know, they end up in the plot honestly enough. They don't have to have a huge convoluted backstory with a huge convoluted society that they're brought into and a Rube Goldberg machine full of events that bring them to that exact place and time where the adventure starts. Sometimes you're just like, you know, I need a little extra cash and I have a sword. I'm going to become an adventurer.
Yep. I think as a storyteller, you can start with some simple hooks that tie them into the story, especially if they're relatively simple storylines.
Sure.
You know, ask them where they got their education. Like, where'd you learn to use that sword? Like, do you have family in town? You know, where do you like to eat? So that you immediately have some very rooted hearth hooks for them.
Yeah.
In the immediate area. Or even in the extended area, like if they're like they're a sword slinger. Okay, well, where did you learn to use a sword? I went to the Kippe Academy. You know, my dad paid for it. Okay, you went to the Kippe Academy.
Okay, so here's the thing. In my experience, though, you're not gonna get that answer. I will turn this right back around on you.
Sure.
The same reason you said, what would you like to see happen next game session?
Yep.
Is the exact same reason why you can't just say to this type of player, where did you learn to use that sword?
Right.
Because they're not going to go, at the Kippei Academy. They're
Right.
going to go, I don't know.
Okay. Well,
I don't know. I guess I just, I don't know, learned. Like, are you self-taught? Sure.
okay.
They're going to take the first suggestion because they don't know.
Right.
You know.
And that's the thing is the closer you can get to simple defined questions that allow them to feel like they are part of the local or part of Hearth and Home, I think you get to a much simpler entry point for them.
Yeah.
You know, like Shadowrun's a giant universe and it scares the crap out of people, and not everyone can come up with a great story about it.
Sure.
But you can always ask them, like, what's your favorite candy? You know, what character's favorite candy? Mr. Goodbars. Or I like chocolate. Okie dokie. You like chocolate. Excellent. And the moment that they come into, you know, a stuffer shack, you're like, hey, Jax, do you here for your chocolate? Yeah. Now they're getting invested.
Yeah.
And that's it. It's that simple.
It's all about the leaving the little breadcrumbs and stuff like that. Yeah. But I think I mean you can pare these types of players down very simply. I've got one or two of these players in my group. And sometimes, like for one of the players, I think it's because I don't necessarily know that, like, she didn't really know the world, and I don't know that she has a lot in mind for what she wants to do with her character.
Sure.
We've talked about it a little bit, and there's some things that we kind of discussed back and forth, but never has this player come to me and been like, okay, I figured my character out, and I think I want to do this with her.
Right.
You know. On the other hand, one of my other characters very much was that style thing where the player was like, I'm not going to write a backstory because I don't know enough about the world yet to tell you what this character's motivations are and such.
Yeah.
But then, 25 game sessions in, I've sat down with this player and they've told me, like, okay. I've got some great ideas now. And I said, all right, let me ask you a couple leading questions. Do you feel like it was this, or do you feel like it was more of this? Oh, it was definitely the first one. All right, cool. That gives me an idea for what NPCs or what, organizations might have led to these events. Tell me more about what happened. And now, like I said, 25 game sessions in, we're coming up with this character's backstory.
Yep.
And it's great. So.
All right, one more question.
Alrighty. So Nox in the Boss asks, and this is a long question. I feel like this is an exercise in improv where the GM is trying to keep the players in the shared driver's seat and keep it natural.
It is.
How do you ask for things for the players to contribute without it turning into a messy and ridiculous game of Mad Libs that might not fly with the other players? Do you only ask for things that are non-consequential and mostly flavor? Or do you trust players with things that might be more important to the plot and main story?
First off, never trust your players with the plot. You don't have to. Everything you're asking is about the world. Your plot doesn't have to fit. Okay. Your plot is not a cog that fits into the world. The world is merely the plastic chassis wrapped around the engine that is your plot. That's it. It's that simple. If your player says that they are a minotaur, and another player is a elven ranger, and another player is a jester, great, because your plot should be able to run with those individuals, and your story can continue.
Yeah.
Now that's my whole thing is that your plot is what you make it, not what your players make it. What you're doing with what they're with what this world building does is give you hooks that they feel inspire them and motivate them. That's it. So if you trust your group enough to not be absolutely ridiculous about their world, and that your plot can basically fit it, will effectively fit into anything, it really doesn't matter what they come up with as long as they fit the theme that works for the group.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, kind of going back to my group, I think it's about setting expectations in the session 0 first.
100%.
100% about session 0, where you say, okay, look, obviously I'm not going to tell you what the plot is, because that's the journey ahead of you,
right.
But when you're creating characters, all I need is a motivation to be an adventurer, and you must be a member of the Fighters Guild or the Mages Guild.
Yep.
And be prepared to take missions from them.
Yeah.
And I got anywheres from literally the entire story of the character is I'm a Khajiit archer.
Mm-hmm.
Where from?
Khajiit land?
Wherever the Khajiit come from. Elsewhere? Yeah, that place.
Yeah.
All the way up to blah 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 blah. I was a noble in High Rock, and this happened, and we had a trading company,
mm-hmm.
and blah blah, which led me to blah 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 blah, and then I came here.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Cool.
All that works.
And now
now you're a member of the Mages Guild.
And now you're a member of the Mages Guild. And that Khajiit archer who comes from elsewhere
is a member of the
now a member of the Fighters Guild.
Yep.
Cool. We're done. As long as that the last sentence of that backstory, whether it is the short one or the long one, is, and now I'm a member of this party doing this plot.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Yeah. I mean, things like Shadowrun give you that focus point.
Mm-hmm.
You're all shadow runners. That's the key.
Right.
How did you get to be a shadow runner? Why are you doing this? Why is that your drive? That's the only thing you really have to answer as a question. I don't care about the rest of it.
Mm-hmm.
That none of that other stuff matters other than it gives me things to hook into.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes right down to it, I don't care you love horses more than anything else. What that does tell me is that if there's a stable going to be in one of my scenes, or horses that are in trouble, or someone who's raising horses, or someone who's breeding horses, that I can throw in to hook you, I know I can hook your character. I know I can do that.
So let me get back to this part of the question, because I don't know that we've answered this one.
Sure.
Yet. Is how do you ask for things from the players to contribute?
So again, that comes back down to scope. Remember that you're defining what is visible.
Mm-hmm.
You can either start from a grand point of looking at their backgrounds and where their background reaches into that scope, like how it blends down to the local
mm-hmm.
of your scope, or start local. Find the people who are most local and ask them the simple questions. Where do you stay? What's a good pub in town?
Mm-hmm.
What's the name of the local blacksmith? Name 2 laws in town that everyone breaks without question.
Mm-hmm.
And that helps define how they feel the area is. And you're cooking them in and making the world feel real to them and attached to them, and at the same time giving yourself outs for your session 0 through 4.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where it is. But the moment you start stepping outside of that scope to the edges of the frame of what they can see, that's where you can pull little bits of their background to attach to those
mm-hmm.
simple little things. The standard of this group, which was the group that brought you here, or then another member of the same academy that you fought in.
Mm-hmm.
Things like that can reach the edge of the scene to draw them in a direction or give them confidence about something.
Yeah, right on.
And keep them inspired. So,
all right. So next week's topic is where's the plot? So we're going to be talking about the dichotomy kind of between location-centric storytelling, as in the story takes place in the city, or player-centric plots, as in plot that follows the players wherever they go. So you can find us on Twitter at @ST_conclave, on Instagram at @ST_conclave. Listen to us live every Wednesday night at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. We record then on mixlr.com/storyteller-conclave. And join us up on our Discord. Join the discussion. Shoot us some questions. We'd love to see that. You can find the link to that on our Twitter or on our website, storytellerconclave.com.
We'd like to thank our Patreon named members, Knox in the Box Sam, The Arcane Asylum, Sparkle Motion, Veteran, and Hulavu. We truly appreciate all your support week after week. Our pre-show music is by Arcane Arcane Anthems. You can find that at patreon.com/arcaneanthems. Our intro music, Beyond the Warriors, is by Geefrog. You can find that at geefrog.bandcamp.com or on Google Music. And our outro music, which you're hearing right now, is Only Our Footprints in the Sand by Midair Machine. You can find that at freemusicarchive.org.
And a big shout out, as always, to our families, Vicky and Sean. Thank you so much for staying with us and loving us all these years.
Yes.
Our friends and family who have sat with us at our tables all these years and given us these great stories to tell you.
And histories and backgrounds.
And histories and backgrounds. And collaborative world building.
Yes.
And you, every single one of our listeners. We love you so much.
We truly, truly love you.
Hang in there, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.